Thank you both for being here, Casey and Brian. And we've been talking about just so many different tracks about diversity inclusion, how to make it matter. I want to say just a word. You're both heroes to me. Brian is someone I've known for a long time. Used to work in the White House with Valerie Jarrett. He was the interface with the community on many, many different issues, but particularly LGBTQ issues. And at that time, Brian, had he not been there, we would not have gotten Don't Ask, Don't Tell repealed, in my view. So I just want to say thank you for that. I was writing a lot, sometimes critically, about that White House and the stance that it had, and Brian moved that ball forward. So thank you very much. And I just want to start with you, Brian, for a minute. Now you're at PFLAG. You've worked in various corners of this community and the area of rights. And I hate the word tolerance. I don't hate the word tolerance, but it's more than tolerance. It's acceptance. It's embrace. It's working together. And I just want to know from you, since Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, what year was that?
That was 2010.
So when you were thinking about what you were creating then in 2010 and where we are today, are you disappointed with where we're at this moment? Have we moved as far as you thought we would by 2019, or should we be substantially disappointed that we haven't achieved more?
First of all, thank you for having us here. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Brian Bond. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I do need to go back to your original statement. Thank you, but I do give all credit to President Obama and his leadership for getting Don't Ask, Don't Tell done. And an incredible group of people, both at the DOD and in the White House, who worked on that. I think one of the things that, to mention President Obama, around his leadership on not just Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but hate crimes and multiple areas within the various agencies. I see Phil's here. He knows a lot of work that went on in his agency and others. The president looked at it as a long game, and by enacting Don't Ask, Don't Tell, enacting it into law, not by executive order. We've seen what can happen with some executive orders. He saw this as and I don't want to speak for him, but as a path towards equality. It's a little hard to ask individuals to fight and die for this country and not acknowledge their spouses and their partners. So there's a long game. I felt like the president constantly looked at things from a long game perspective. To your point, I think we have come a long way. I think there has been what I would call a backlash, if you will. Not surprising, as candidly, there's a lot of people who don't agree with us, and we're seeing that play out. There's a lot of hate right now that's being spouted out that is having an impact, and Casey will be able to speak to that, on the impact that's having on kids and on families. I think just for those of you who don't know what PFLAG is, PFLAG is the oldest and largest LGBTQ plus individuals, parents, family, and friends organization around the country. Our primary goal is to support families as they go through their journey of helping their kids come out. And it's been around for 47 years. There are 400 chapters around the country, about 200,000 members. And I think we'll touch on this a little later, but one of our other programs that we do is around building allies through our Straight for Equality program in the corporate space, which is really crucial. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, it does. It does. So let me, Casey, ask you the same thing. And I know that in addition to the Trevor Project, and thank you for all you do in that area, I was thinking of you this morning when I was interviewing Malik Panchali, because Malik sort of tells the story of a young 12-year-old. It's a novel, but a lot of it is related to his own life of coming out, the bullying, the identity challenges, the issues, and the stress of those times. So Trevor has been for those of you who don't know, and I'll give Casey a chance to share what that is all about. But you've worked in the terrain as well. And can I ask you, should we be disappointed about where we're at right now, or should we, as a collective, LGBTQ and plus community friends, feel proud of where we are right now?
I would say the answer to that question is a little bit of both, unsurprisingly. So the Trevor Project is our nation's largest provider of suicide prevention and crisis intervention services for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth. In the last year, we've served 80,000 youth who have contacted us through our 24/7 telephone, lifeline, chat, and text services, where they can come to us in moments of crisis and have somebody hear them and listen to them who understands and can tell them that they are loved just as they are and should be accepted just as they are. You're right, my career does go back in my days prior to the Trevor Project to working on Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal from outside the White House, shall we say. And
Thank you for that.
thank you. But yes, so the work then was always to create a world where those who want to serve, are capable of serving, should be able to serve, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and this is important. So we can be proud of how far we've come in terms of open service for lesbian, gay, and bisexual service members, and where we went from folks doing so much fear-mongering of what that was going to mean when our military allowed for open service, and our military really rose to the occasion in terms of demonstrating that if you are qualified and capable, you can serve. And we even, over the course of the years since that repeal, we were able to expand that to allowing for open service by transgender folks in their gender identity. We had that for a time, and then, as folks know, we lost it, in part. But we lost it in a way that is particularly traumatic for LGBTQ youth. On the day when the president released his tweets declaring that there was no place in our military for transgender individuals, suggesting that transgender individuals are a burden, the Trevor Project heard from a spike in youth contacting us. And this is because of many reasons. When the leader of the free world calls you out and says that you are in some way a burden, that is harmful to mental health and self-esteem. When an avenue to achievement and to, in many cases, a new life, the United States military, which is one of our largest employers, when that avenue is closed to you, that is closing down one form of hope. And so it is tremendously important that we continue to work to reopen that avenue for all folks who are qualified to want to serve, because it doesn't just affect people who want to serve in the military or who are serving. It sends a message to every transgender youth in this country about the extent to which we value you and the extent to which we believe in your capability. And we should believe in the strength and resilience of these youth in particular. We hear from them so often on the Trevor Project, and I am always amazed at the strength of our LGBTQ youth.
Casey, thank you for that. And I want to ask you just another question on this. When John McCain was around, I had the privilege of interviewing Senator McCain dozens of times, actually, and often on this subject. And while he had been one of those who had resisted at the moment Don't Ask, Don't Tell, once Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, John McCain became one of its most important enforcers, that we don't go back, we don't regress. And I think became a friend and ally of those serving, and including transgendered issues. And so I guess my question to you, he's not around anymore. Do you have Republican support for your efforts to restore those rights?
These are issues that are bipartisan, and I will call out that on the day of Trump's tweets condemning transgender service, there were many Republicans that pushed back on that said that went too far. John McCain was one, Senator Joni Ernst was another, and it went on down with many Republicans saying that if people want to serve and are capable of serving up to standards, they should be able to serve. So that is one of those areas. Similarly, there had been amendments and churn in the House where there would be a proposal to refuse to spend money on transgender health care for our military service members. And that amendment was defeated on the floor with the support of 30, 40 House members, Republican House members. So this is one of those issues where when we're talking about our men, women, non-binary individuals in uniform, that there is respect for what they do. That respect, unfortunately, may not rise all the way to the White House today, but that will change.
Brian?
I just want to add a couple things. This is not just happening at DOD. This is happening across the administration, and especially the attacks on transgender individuals is pretty heinous and hateful, honestly. You can look at what HHS is trying to do around the Affordable Care Act and healthcare-related issues. I mean, the list goes on. Separate from the government component, to your original question on kind of the climate, if you will, and where we are today, we have seen advances, and I know it's a cliche thing, but there's still 17 states where you can get married on Sunday and then get fired on Monday, right? I mean, but it's true. We have what's going on with the Supreme Court right now around sexual orientation, gender identity, Title VII related issues, which some of that is out of our control, right? It's the Supreme Court. But we have an important responsibility as a community to lead the narrative of what all that means. And then,
I want to ask you to go back to that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. The one last piece around the cultural side of this, we just had our convention in Kansas City this last weekend. Casey was there. When we were originally putting together one of the pages we were going to do in our program book, it was around the number of transgender people of color, mostly black women, who have been killed. And that number was at 24 when we started to go to print. On October 14th, I think it was, the 25th person was killed, a black transgender woman in Kansas City, 30 years old. Her name was Breonna Bibi Hill. And we had to add her to that list. That's how fast some of this stuff is moving. It's egregious, it's wrong. And I said this at our convention, and I'm not trying to be dramatic about it, but if that were 25 gay, straight, white men like me, the world would be going crazy to solve that problem. And what I found and felt out of our convention, which is made up of a lot of moms and dads and allies and friends, that rage was there. And now what are we going to do about it? But that's one of the side effects. I can't quantitate, or I can't tell you it's exactly because of the hate rhetoric that's going on now, because last year was also really bad. But we need to be talking more about the systemic hate that's there, and I don't care what these individuals do, what's going on in their lives. They're human beings, and we need to, as a community and as a world, care about these individuals as such.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you about this. I finally watched. I'm sure many of you were way there before I was, but the two movies. There's one documentary, and the other is the movie on RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so this law, that 1964 law that there would not be discrimination of employees based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Now we're debating that who is covered in that sex quadrant, and that had given at least some hope and refuge. You just mentioned this, Brian, and I'm just interested in how fragile is the situation. How fragile are our rights, are those of us that are in the LGBTQ camp? How fragile are all of our rights in these upcoming Supreme Court decisions?
So I will defer to Casey, who's a lawyer, probably better to answer that than me. What I would say is we are at a fragile moment, to use your frame on this. I do think around the SCOTUS cases right now, we have to use voices to be part of the narrative, to learn from all of this and what's going on, regardless of the outcome. And Casey can, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you can speak to that. But we also need to enact the Equality Act. Over 30 states, this is something we need to do to codify into law around housing, job discrimination, accessibility, public places, all that. So that's the long-term solution. It's going to take a while, thanks to the leadership of Speaker Pelosi and many on the Hill, that it's done on the House side.
And Ben Ray Lujan said it was a huge priority this morning. Yeah,
cool. And now we're kind of beholden to Mitch McConnell to try to move it to the Senate side, which means there may need to be some changes in the Senate to actually have that discussion, and then obviously a president who will sign that. So, but again, I would say all this discussion around the Supreme Court and the work that's going on in the various states, all this is about lifting up voices, which is part of what PFLAG tries to do, is to make sure people know they're not alone. We're all in this journey together, and to amplify those voices. But I'll defer to Casey to talk a little more about that.
Certainly. And on the issue of the Title VII lawsuits, this was actually one of those places where Trevor Project was so proud to partner with PFLAG in that together our organizations plus the Family Equality Council actually filed an amicus brief raising up the kinds of stories of the discrimination and the harm that we all hear about, and making specifically the argument that the kind of discrimination that people experience because of their sexual orientation or gender identity really does all boil down to being discrimination about sex. This is discrimination that is intensely gendered, and we all know what that's like. So that's the argument that we were really facing before the Supreme Court this year, is does the word sex include discrimination where a woman is fired for marrying a woman where a man would not be similarly fired? Does discrimination based on sex include discrimination against a transgender woman as opposed to a cisgender man? And we obviously believe that that is so, and we're not alone in that. There has been decades of work on this in the courts with actual rulings in various different circuit courts of appeal coming down on our side. So while in terms of the words in the law books in states, we do still have 30 states that need to be writing down the words sexual orientation and gender identity. But if we were to lose those protections at the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court were to narrowly read sex to exclude LGBTQ people, that would be rolling back rights. So we're in a place of really trying to raise that up, raise those stories. And it is a situation where, having listened to the arguments, yes, there was some interest out of Justice Gorsuch in reading from a very textualist basis. Well, the word says sex there, and this looks a lot like sex discrimination. But on the other side of it, I really came away from the arguments recognizing that we still have a lot of education work to do. That even these brilliant justices from across the spectrum of who nominated them have some work yet to do in terms of understanding, especially our transgender siblings, and what their life experience is like. And so yes, we will, no matter what the outcome of this decision is, there was still education work to do. And it is also important to know that on the federal level, the word sex appears in legal protections for employment, for housing, but it does not appear for public accommodations. It does not appear for federal funding. So there are places where even with an expansive definition of sex, or rather appropriately inclusive definition, there's work to be done in passing comprehensive LGBT protections on the federal level and in the states.
I want to go to all of you in just a minute, but my last question is recently I met Rick Grinnell. Ambassador Rick Grinnell is a U.S. ambassador to Germany, and he was at the UN General Assembly, and he spent a lot of time talking about the efforts that President Trump is making and he is making to raise the question of decriminalizing homosexuality, decriminalizing the penalties against LGBTQ youth. Do you think they're not getting enough credit for that work? And is that work that they're trying to do internationally by way of law somehow not connecting to what they're doing here in the United States?
It is, I appreciate any public statement that speaks to the plight of LGBT people abroad, especially now when we are seeing a resurrection of legislation in, say, Uganda that proposes to apply the death penalty to homosexuality. That said, I was just recently in a meeting with the Department of Housing and Urban Development about a proposed rule that would allow for discrimination by homeless shelters against transgender people. And so when your rules and your policies at home are resulting in harm and potentially deaths to the LGBTQ community, I do see a certain irony that from an administration that has spoken about America first, that it is leaving America's LGBTQ population last in its calculus.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm trying to be really nice here.
You don't have to be.
No, I mean, at the end of the day,
no need to be nice.
At the end of the day, proof is in the pudding.
I was the nice one.
Proof is in the pudding. You know,
Yeah.
and to Casey's point, you know, I'm glad the ambassador is talking these things, but you have to walk the walk too, and that's not what's happening here. And especially in places, countries like Uganda and others, where there are conversations going on, we may have certain diplomats that come in and have quiet conversations about X, Y, and Z, but it depends on what's coming from the top. And they read everything that this president says and that his administration is doing, and they know they're going to get a pass at the end of the day if they don't. And it's sad because it impacts lives, life and death in many cases.
Well, thank you, Francis. I needed to pose a question. Like we have this gentleman right here. Hey, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you. Thank you to the Hill for doing this great forum this morning. Brian, we've been longtime friends. I would happily be in the trenches with you any day of the week.
Remind the folks who you are.
Phil McNamara with the Pew Charitable Trust. My question is, and I'm picking up on a point Casey made regarding sort of the education regarding our transgender brothers and sisters. And I know it's not the sort of focus of either of your organizations, but would you have maybe a recommendation that you could share with an employer as to how to sort of improve the the working conditions for a transgender individual, non-binary? You know, is it as simple as unisex bathrooms? Is it as simple as using, as you did, Brian, the he, him, his pronouns? What are those things that employers could be doing, you know, today to improve the conditions?
Terrific. Thank you.
Sure. In terms of folks to look to, immediately comes to mind is Out and Equal, is an organization that is made up largely of organizing the employee resource groups at different companies and corporations. So they've got decades of experience on how to go about this. Also, very much it's a matter of talk to your trans employees. What do they want? What do they need? And actually listen to that and bring, this is a question for any diversity issue of whenever you're trying to set policies, have the folks who are most affected by those policies at the table writing them. Let them write the first draft. So it's one of those things. But really it all boils down to treating each other decently with respect and how folks want to be treated.
Brian, any quick thoughts?
Sure. I would add to Out and Equal, I would also add in CTE, Mark Kiesling does an incredible job and I believe is building out a program around this space to be supportive. Just a couple of quick stats, and this is LGBTQ wide, but we do a lot of workplace cultural training through our Straight for Equality program. 80% of individuals that have been surveyed in the corporate space, you know, think that employees should be out. But then that same group, when you ask them, a little over 50%, 59% actually say, well, it's unprofessional for them to talk about their sexual orientation or gender identity. and then a 30-some% get really squeamish if you talk about who you may be on a date with. So there's a lot of work there. You know, I talked earlier about passing the Equality Act. Moving the dial forward in the corporate space around allies and building allies is really crucial. And I'll just real quick, if I could, we all talk about diversity. Diversity is just numbers. You need to go that extra layer to inclusion and having people at the table. But then you need to go further, and this, to your point about asking trans employees what they want, is belonging. And belonging is when people are charged and then responsible and able to actually help make that change happen in that corporate or whatever other space it is. That's the model we work from in our ally training. But you know, that was a really good question, Phil. So thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you both, Brian Bond of PFLAG and Casey Pick of the Trevor Project. Thank you so much. I know Brian in particular, you went through hell to get here, to be here today. So thank you so much for joining us. Big round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.